usually drug addicts and drug dealers with kids, aren't the nicest parents. They're not like giving you everything you need, and that safe environment. Obviously, abuse. Did abuse go on? Did that your mom's boyfriend abuse you, or anything of that matter?
Sexual abuse. I remember being touched by him. He would just, hey man, this is normal. We're dudes. This is what we do. And I'm like 4 or 5 years old. My younger sister was 3 years old. He would touch her too, like with us and all of us together, like, oh, I'm teaching you how to be a woman. And then my mom had my youngest sister, which she was a year and a half. And I remember he wouldn't touch her, but he would beat her.
Wow, man.
A year and a half old, I remember she would pee in her diaper because she's a baby. That's what babies do, a year and a half old. And he would beat the living out of her. Like, he would literally beat her with a belt for peeing in her diaper, and that's how he would get her to potty train, right?
So let me introduce you to my guest, Shane Pinson. Grew up here in San Diego, and his business is Slim Rips TCG LLC. And some of his accolades is poker dealer, award-winning store record holder for AT&T, and he's just a straight-up entrepreneur and business owner, man. Shane, my buddy, my friend, how the hell are you doing this morning?
Oh, fantastic, man. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good, man. I'm doing pretty good. You wake up and drink some of that delicious brown nectar?
I do, man. But I don't like it hot. I like it cold, man. Nothing like a cold, refreshing drink in the morning for me.
Oh, do you make it hot and then cold, or do you cold brew it somehow? Or
no, I make it hot, man. I brew it and then a couple ice, pour it over the ice, put some creamer in. I'm out.
Oh, no kidding, man. No kidding. Okay, and not even black. So you put creamer over it. What kind of creamer you put into it?
Yeah, I could be a little soft sometimes. I like my sweetness.
What do you like? Pumpkin spice?
Oh man, don't get me started, man. Yeah, when the pumpkin spice season comes around, man, I'm there. I'm at Starbucks all the time, man.
Yeah. I am too, man. Well, not Starbucks.
Yeah.
But
total white girl.
Oh yeah, dude. I have there's this, I can't remember the artist, but she has a parody song of being a basic bitch. Yeah. And sometimes in pumpkin spice season, I play it for my kids as I'm dropping them off at school, and my daughter absolutely just is like, "Oh my God, Dad, stop embarrassing me." This is not
That's
cool.
What we get to do.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, "Well, this is cool to me, not you."
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I can't live without it, man. I run on coffee nonstop. But everybody has her own thing with coffee, man. That's the perfect thing about coffee, dude.
Yes.
It's not one thing fits everybody. Do what the hell you want to do with it. Pour over a French press, cold brew. I'm not here to judge. I'm just here to partake.
Exactly.
That's awesome, man. What does your morning routine look like, man? Wake up, work out, coffee it up, or what?
Yeah, so depending on, I have my son, so 50-50, so those mornings can be a little bit different. I wake up in the morning probably at 5:30, 6 a.m. every morning, just that automatic alarm clock in my body, and get up. I usually get up earlier before the kids, before the chaos. I like to get ready before they do, because then if I don't, you know how it goes, man.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll get up, make my coffee, do my morning thing, go in, take the Browns to the Super Bowl, take my shower, get my hair, ready, and then I start waking the kids up, and then we're good.
Well, it's important to take that little bit of time before the kids for you, man.
Yeah.
Whether that's reading, coffee, sitting on the porch, a sunrise, whatever your drug is, man.
Right.
It's important for that time, man, because that's just kind of set your time for that day, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome, man. So you grew up here in San Diego, and I didn't grow up here in San Diego. How was it growing up here in San Diego, man?
So I was born here in San Diego, and then my mom got put into a rehab facility in Texas. So when I was here, when I was 1 year old, I was here up until about one and a half. Then my mom moved us to Texas to go into an inpatient program. I was there for about 8 years, the first 8 years of my life. And then when I got back to San Diego when I turned 8, and I've been here ever since. San Diego's, just depends. San Diego's very big and very, San Diego in general as a whole, that's what everybody sees it as. But there's a lot of subcities in San Diego where, the people from San Diego, if you've been here for a while, they'll say like, what part of San Diego? So I grew up in a predominantly Hispanic and Black neighborhood. That was different, going to school, being the only white boy at school. Always got messed with for sure. They saw a little white kid going around. Being in the city though, inner city, that was awesome. It definitely cultured me, I believe. It helped me just get used to different diversities in the world, and different people. So getting acclimated to different, getting acclimated in different types of cities is
well, it seems
really
like seems like at a young age you are already getting acclimated to a different kind of life than what most people are already living. Because you said at 1 year old your mom went to a rehab in Texas.
Yes.
And she was there. Obviously she probably wasn't in rehab for 8 years.
Right.
But she was in there for probably
about 2 years.
So 2 years you grew up in a rehab around people who are just trying to get healthy, but are not 100% healthy.
Yeah.
Did that have a role on you as far as like going to school and how you kind of how your played out and your mentality played out as a young kid? From before you moved to San Diego, like did you have some trouble? Did you have some trouble growing up and causing a bunch of ruckus in school or what?
Oh, so when I remember a lot of like snippets, kind of like screenshots of my childhood. When we got to Texas, me and my sister were placed into a group home while my mom was in the inpatient for the first 12 months, essentially. And I remember, some people say you don't remember things when you're little. I remember being 2 years old, my mom dropping me off at the shelter and telling me, hey, it's going to be a year until you see me again. But when you see me again, like, I'm going to be right. I'm going to be, I'm going to have my shit together, essentially. And I remember going to that facility. I remember being in the room, in the bedroom, bunking up with 12 different kids whose parents were going through the same thing. I remember the routines. It was almost like being in juvenile hall, being in jail. It's like hourly bed checks, people coming in, flashing you, making sure, on a flashlight to see if you're asleep. Routine, wake up in the morning, breakfast, lunch, school, getting off of school, doing chores, doing duties around the facility, shower times, and making sure, it was like 3-minute showers. Here and like being at 2 years old, it was like very military-esque for sure. At a young age.
Wow, man, that is, that's something I don't hear a lot of that. I've never heard a lot of that. I've never, met somebody who's going through that kind of lifestyle.
Yeah.
Did you, so you, from 2 years old, did you see your mom kind of during that period, or was she like sucked into that program just to get her healthy and you didn't get to see her often, or was there visiting times and stuff?
I really don't remember having much contact with her with those 12 months. We might have had a few phone calls here and there, but when, my mom struggled mightily. When my mom was 8 years old, my grandmother's 8th birthday present to my mom was a piezo pipe and a bottle of schnapps. And so at 8 years old, so my mom
what is that? What's a piezo pipe?
Meth.
Oh, piezo's meth? That's another name for meth?
No, so the pipe is called a piezo pipe essentially, and it's like this long skinny pipe, and at the very end there's like a ball, and there's a little vent chamber in there, and then you put it in there, and then you like literally like hold the lighter like you see in like the movies with like the crack guys, and they're sitting there rolling, twisting it, and the little smoke's coming out, and then they hit it and they off to La La Land.
And that was her present to your mom when you were 8 years old, and that's a memory.
When my mom was 8 years old, yeah.
When your mom was 8 years old, so your mom started getting addicted to this stuff, just at 8.
That age, 8 years old. My grandmother did the same thing to me on my 8th birthday. She said she didn't have any money, so she said, "Here's a 40 ounce of King Cobra and a joint."
What's a King Cobra?
King Cobra, you don't see it unless you're in like the ghetto. But King Cobra is a type of beer. It's
Is it
one
like
of those
malt
cheap
liquor or
beers.
something?
Yeah, it was. It's a 40 ounce. It was like $1.20. And that's what my grandmother could afford at the time. So it was. She'd go to the store. My grandmother drank 40 ounces a day of King Cobra. She was such a King Cobra drinker that they would actually send her like materials like mugs and ashtrays and dishes that said King Cobra because she drank so much of that.
King Cobra fan club, like,
Yeah.
hey, thank you for being our number one supporter.
Exactly. I mean, a grandmother, right? She's out there just pounding 40s, and I'm like, all right, that's cool. So,
dude, oh man, what? So I'm getting a drug education here.
yeah, you are. I'm not a
know,
professional by any means. I'm just,
well, it's to each your own on that one. But I mean, so your grandma gives you this at your 8th birthday.
Mm-hmm.
Your mom's mom gave it to your mom on her 8th birthday. So this pattern just kind of is a repeating pattern of your grandma, because she obviously is not healthy.
No, she's not.
I don't know
either.
if she ever got healthy.
No, she did not get healthy.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like at 40 you're usually, it's going to take a little bit to get you back to healthy.
100%.
But your mom got to rehab, and after 2 years, did she come out clean and stay sober?
Yeah, she got out. She got out clean. She came out, had celebrated 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. Got hired on at McDonald's. She worked full-time at McDonald's and full-time at Dunkin' Donuts in Texas. Got me and my sister back. That lasted, got a house, was working 60, 70 hours a week. Things were good. And I remember that lasting for about a year and a half with my mom. And I remember one day coming home, or one day me and my sister were waiting to get picked up from my mom at school, and she didn't show up. And it was about 2:00 in the afternoon, and me and my sister were literally there until 6:30 at night. And I remember my aunt, who is my mom's best friend, she's my god aunt, she came and picked us up, and she's like, I know where your mom's at. And she took us to where my mom's at, and it was at a completely different house than, I've never seen before. She was with a dude that I'd never seen before. And I just remember my mom opening the door at the front, there, because my aunt was laying on the horn when she had us in her car at 6:30 at night. My mom came out, and I was like, I just knew right away. I could tell the look on my mom's face. I mean, at a very young age, and I was like, this is not good. And we went into the house, and we didn't leave that house for 4 years until I was 8 years old, when my aunt pretty much told me, she's like, he's not staying here anymore. And that's when we came back to California.
So 8 years old, you're prior to 8 years old, you're living with your aunt,
mm-hmm.
and then your mom went off the deep end again, I take it, essentially.
Well, my aunt dropped me off at my mom's place. My aunt wasn't, she wasn't a saint either. She was definitely drugs and alcohol as well. And the guy that my mom was living with, was pretty much a drug dealer. So we were living in the trap house for about 2.5 years, where it was just a nightmare for sure as a child. And my aunt was living there too, and she decided that she wanted to get clean and sober, and that her opportunity was going to be back here in San Diego working for her brother. So she left to California, and I had said I didn't want to be in that house anymore. And so she took me and my 2 younger sisters, and in between that time frame, my mom had another child with another drug addict and had a 3rd baby. And I remember leaving, and my mom's let me go, but my 2 younger sisters wanted to stick with my mom, and that was about 7 years old. And then that's when we moved back to California.
And at this time, I mean, usually drug addicts and drug dealers with kids, aren't the nicest parents. They're not like giving you everything you need, and that safe environment, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Abuse. Did abuse go on? Did that your mom's boyfriend abuse you, or anything?
Yeah, it was that was like you're supposed to remember like happy childhood memories, and my first memories of being a child from or my mom entering into a program, then my mom getting me back, and then me getting picked up from my mom, and then all of a sudden entering this hell house. Sexual abuse. I remember being touched by him. He would, hey man, this is normal. We're dudes. This is what we do. And I'm like 4 or 5 years old. My younger sister was 3 years old. He would touch her too, like with us in the, all of us together, like, oh, I'm teaching you how to be a woman. And then my mom had my youngest sister, which she was a year and a half. And I remember he wouldn't touch her, but he would beat her. And she was, a year and a half old. I remember she would pee in her diaper, because she's a baby. That's what babies do, a year and a half old. And he would beat the living shit out of her. Like, he would literally beat her with a belt for peeing in her diaper. And that's how he would get her to potty train, right? So I remember coming home, like when I was 5 years old. I remember my sister had lashings all over her back one time, and I tried to kill the dude. I literally did. I grabbed a butcher knife, kitchen knife, and I chased him. I went into the room and I went up behind him and I tried to cut his throat when I was 5 years old, because he was torturing us and my sister. He would lock us up in the closet during the day. We didn't go to school when we were at that age. He held us out of school because if we went to school with the beatings that we had on us, he'd get in trouble. He would go to work. He worked for the city water department for Texas. He would lock us up in the closet as soon as he left, and he would literally bar the door shut and wouldn't feed us. We were only allowed to eat when he was there. So he'd give us a meal in the morning, which was like a can of raviolis. He'd come home at 6 o'clock at night, unlock the door, make us another can of raviolis, and would put us in the room. And then he'd go into the room and just get high with my mom, and then come out. My mom would be loaded and, almost like a zombie. He would just drug her up and he would just beat the living shit out of us all the time. And so, I remember that for sure as a kid, very, very vividly at 5 years old. I remember I used to try to set up booby traps when he would come home. We had this giant ass tree in the front yard. And I remember I stacked 3 layers of bricks, and I had tied him up, and I threw the rope over the tree, and I had pulled the rope as far back as I could, and I hid behind the tree. And as he walked up the steps, I let it go, and I tried to drop the 9-layer of bricks on him, and I missed him, and he beat the shit out of me for that.
Holy
I
fuck.
remember for sure, like, I remember just the belt, man. I don't know, like, I'm not saying I'm Jesus Christ or anything, but if there's, like, that was definitely one of those days where I'm like, I know what this feels like, just like royally, just bruises and like backlashings. And that was the first time where they would send me and my sisters off to church camp on Sundays to kind of get some day free of the kids. And I remember going to church and they were like, what's going on with you? And I had bruises all over myself, black eye, they lifted my shirt up and I had lashings all over my back. And I remember being at church, they called the police, and they went back and investigated the house, and the guys just like, they did nothing. They literally escorted me back in the cop car, went to the house, talked to the guy, came in. I mean, the house is a wreck. There's maggots all over the floor. 13 different people living in the house in different rooms, and they'd come in and be like, wait, what's going on? And he would hide in the closet. My mom was like, oh, I don't know what happened. That must have happened while something else, whatever. And they're like, okay, ma'am, well, make sure you take care of your kids. And then they would just leave us there again.
So the police would come and nothing would happen?
Never. No.
Wow, man.
Yeah.
So you never had a sense of security?
Oh, never.
Growing up, I mean, you were just on edge the whole time. I mean, the sexual, the mental, the physical, I always wondered, like, how come people, when go through stuff like this, don't become serial killers like Dahmer?
Yeah,
right. I mean, it seems like Dahmer didn't even have that bad of a childhood, and look what happened to him, right?
Yeah. I don't know if he was for me, it was, there's some times like where I've thought about becoming serial, but it was definitely going to be serial against serial child abusers. Like I despise them. Anytime, like even in public, I have a hard time. I remember one time at AT&T, I could tell, and growing up in it, I can tell people, like I could read people like a book from the very beginning. And I just remember, being a store manager at AT&T and seeing this guy come in and with a girl and 2 kids, and I just knew something was up. And he was just very assertive and, hey, I need these phones, because he was trying to scam us for some phones. And the kids were like sitting on the chair, being kids. They're 2-4 years old, and like they're joking around and trying to have a good time. And he's like grabbing them, shifting them, sit down on the chair and like yelling at him. And I remember, that triggered me, like being that child. And I was like, hey man, I remember I went up to him, dude, and I threatened him in the store. I was like, you put your hands on that kid again, I swear to God, you'll leave her in the hospital. And I remember my boss talking to me afterwards about it. because I kicked him out. I was like, you guys got to go. I called the cops. The cops came and like investigated the car. He fled. I have no idea what happened. And I remember my manager's like, hey man, that's not your job. And I'm like, the fuck it's not. You know what I mean? I'm like, you're not gonna sit there and like tell me that's not my job when there's 4 or 5-year-old kids that are getting their ass beat by somebody and no one's gonna step in like that. Like that. I just told him, I was like, you have the wrong guy. For sure. So
yeah, absolutely. It is our job. It is our job in society to sometimes step in, you know, and say, hey, what you're doing isn't right, especially coming from somebody who knows the signs. Yeah. Like, kind of subject matter expert here. Like,
exactly.
You know, I know it.
You know.
So where was your dad through this whole thing, though?
Oh man, my dad. So my dad was murdered and pretty much in our front yard when I was in. That's essentially what led to my mom moving to Texas. Was my dad being killed. He was set up doing a drug bust, or not a drug bust, but he was set up. He was doing a drug deal, and he had one of his little hoochies that were working with him and introduced him to a new guy. And the story that I remember, or the story that I was told, was that he was sitting in the driver's seat and his girlfriend was sitting in the passenger seat, and he had some guy in the back seat behind him, and he was doing the deal, doing the exchange. The guy just pulled out a gun, put it right to the back of his head, pulled the trigger, shot him right in front of our house in City Heights, rolled him up in a carpet, left him in an alley, and went on with his day.
Wow, man. Mm-hmm. That's brutal, and that's what led to your mom kind of going,
I need to go.
Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. Probably should get out of here, huh?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And
there's more to that dad story though later on. I'm sure
we're gonna get to that. We're definitely gonna get to that.
Yeah.
So you grew up. You came here in San Diego, 8, and essentially moved to a neighborhood that you know, only white kid, man.
Yeah, only white kid.
You know, that's got to be unnerving a little bit as well. But you're here with your aunt that is now sober, right? And
at the time, it looked
the sober, most sober person in your life.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely, she had a job. I mean, that was a A+ grade on when it comes to that.
Wow. And she moved you to San Diego. And where'd you go from there, man? Like, so you went 8 years old. You're here in San Diego. You know, what happened, man? Like, what happened from 8 to living with your aunt? Yeah, whatever. Yeah. I mean, like, your aunt, you know, living with your aunt. Your mom's obviously off the deep end. You know, tell me, how was it living with your aunt?
So my aunt was a little bit better in the sense that, you know, she had gotten off drugs, but she was still definitely a heavy drinker. And we were living in a house in Spring Valley where it was her and her girlfriend. And she was renting from another drug dealer who had pretty much figured out later on in life that I was just one drug house to another. Would come home. She put me in school, right? So I was going to school, and I remember coming home, and same thing. I wasn't allowed to eat when I wasn't, when the adults didn't allow me to eat. A, because they were spending all their money on drugs, and B, there was no food in the house anyways. And I was always secluded by myself because there was no kids around besides the kids that I got in trouble with around in the neighborhood. And
where's your sisters?
My sister stayed with my mom.
Really? In that house with that sexual abuse, that predator?
Yeah. They wouldn't go. My mom gave them the option to come, and they wanted to stay. And so my youngest sister at the time, I found this out later on too. My youngest sister, the youngest of all of us, her dad is actually the lead guitarist for the country singer Travis Trit. And they got connected. Her dad, had a little bit of a bender time for a couple of years. Got connected with my mom and knocked her up, had a baby, and her dad got a hold of what was happening with my mom, and he had come into the picture and taken my youngest sister away from my mom. And so the only child that was left was my sister Allison, who was the 4th child of my mom, and she stuck with my mom pretty much up until 18.
Wow. I mean, thank God for Travis Trit coming into the picture and taking her out. I mean,
it was his lead guitarist, not the.
His lead guitarist. So it's not Travis Trit. No. The lead guitarist for his band. Yeah. But thank God for him coming in to swooping her out and hopefully being a good father to that daughter and getting her in some treatment.
Yeah.
Do you stay in contact with her now?
So we got reconnected about 10 years ago. Her dad was very protective, rightfully so, of the family. And so when he did get custody of her, they moved to Tennessee and built his life. He got remarried, I think he had a couple more kids, but still was doing some band, still was doing some traveling with Travis Trit. Really good, really well off. I got reconnected with my sister when she turned 18. So her dad had secluded her from the family, and rightfully so. Everybody on my mom's side of the family was, she wasn't allowed to talk to. And so when she turned 18, she found me on Facebook, and we had reached out. And I had always known who my sister was. And we, had opportunities of trying to reach out to her and have communication, but her dad would pretty much cut that off as soon as possible. And at about 22 years old, I remember she had gotten a hold of me and she really wanted to come out to San Diego. And her dad pretty much kiboshed that. And I remember calling him, and I remember having a conversation with him. I was 22, and I was just like, hey, look, man, like, I understand why you're cutting everybody off, but let me tell you why, like, I don't deserve that. And I kind of went through and I was like, I'm going to college. I got a college athletic scholarship. I got my shit together. I'm taking care of my sister's 2 kids right now, actually, and kind of let them know, like,
we'll get to that.
We'll get to that too. And so, I kind of let him know. I was like, hey, look, dude, like, I'm not the one you should be cutting off. Like, I don't have a drug problem. I don't have a drinking problem. Like, I got my shit together. And then it took some time to finally earn that trust. But we communicate every now and then. He'll be on Facebook and send me a message and like, hey, man, awesome, dude, to see you as a dad to your kids, or congratulations on the business. So we touch base, and that open communication with my younger sister has definitely like been able to flow. I can reach out to her anytime I want. We haven't seen each other though. I haven't seen her. I'm 32 now. I haven't seen her since I was 7 years old.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the beauty about, Facebook, Instagram, even though you're not right next to each other, you can kind of live vicariously through, their life and kind of see them mature up and see some of the portions of their life. Thank God for technology. It's a blessing and a curse.
Right.
But 100%. We'll get to the curse maybe here in a minute, or maybe the blessing actually. For you, actually, probably a blessing.
For sure.
So you're 8 years old. You get to San Diego. You're going to school now, and tell me a little about your school life, man.
So I'm going to school. So I went to different schools every year up, and so through elementary school to middle school, I went to a different school every single year. I was living in Spring Valley at the time. I was living with my aunt. She was there, she was present, but she also wasn't when, with drugs and alcohol. And I remember about 6 months of living with her in California is when my grandmother, my mom's mom, was living in San Diego as well too. And my aunt had reached out and said that she had pretty much couldn't take care of me anymore. So that's when she moved me into my grandmother's house. So I went from Spring Valley to City Heights. And that's kind of where the new chapter of child abuse went down with my grandmother and her boyfriend at the time. My grandmother was married and had a boyfriend. So living in the house, 1-bedroom house, sleeping on the couch. Man, it was crazy. I remember living with my grandmother. I was excited. I'm like, I'm living with family, yada, yada, yada. Things are good. And I mean, it didn't take me long to realize I was just one hell house to another. I remember, getting into that place, and my grandmother, of course, was very nurturing. She always made sure I was fed. She always made sure I was clean. She always made sure I had what I needed as far as my essentials, with clothing and going to school. She made sure I got up on time. She didn't give a shit about my grades. She didn't care what I was doing. And, being up until 8 years old, I was an honor roll student, straight A's, straight B's, and definitely was like the good kid at school, had my shit together with grades, and like was a great kid. But quickly learning, going to school in City Heights and being the only white kid in school, I was a little bit of a pussy back then. I was going through it. I was figuring myself out. I went through trauma, and I'd like to give people, benefit of the doubt. But I remember going to school the first day, and they're like, "Oh, who's this white boy?" And it was just like, I'd go home, they'd throw rocks at me, they'd punk me, they'd like bully me. They'd lock me in a bathroom, and I was non-confrontational at all. Like I was, and it was one of those ones like you're fighting or you're getting your ass beat. And I remember it lasted like 2 weeks of me just getting my ass beat every single day because I didn't want to fight back, man. Like I love people, I didn't want to hurt people. That's not who I was. And I remember it was one of these times I was like riding my bike home, man. I was getting chased by like 20 Mexican dudes, and they're just like throwing rocks at me, trying to chase me home. Like for real, like as soon as that final school bell rang, I was like beelined it to my bike, and I got out of there as fast as I could, flew like a bat out of hell to get to my house. And I remember these dudes were in City Heights, and they had pretty much stopped the dudes from punking me, and they were like, hey man, like they got around these older heads in City Heights, and they were like, quit fucking with the white boy. And I remember they had like punked these dudes, and they had left me alone. And that's kind of when I had felt my first sense of security. I was like, man, like I immediately latched onto these guys because these guys were like, stop these dudes from beating me up. Some of the dudes, went to town on these guys for me, and then I stopped getting fucked with on my way home. But that led to, they were in a gang, and so it was one of those ones where it's like, hey man, like we did something for you, now it's time for you to start doing shit for us. And I remember it just switched over to, now I was riding with, our gang was BAB, which was Badass Bombers, because we were a tagging gang, and we'd tag up City Heights all over the place. And I mean, getting jumped in, with the gangs. I was 8 years old, bro. And so I'm like getting jumped into gangs at 8 years old, and all these dudes are in high school, post high school, and they were kind of just, but for me, I mean, it was legitimate. Like it was my first sense of protection. Like I did what I had to do. And as soon as I did what I had to do, I did my time with them, and I did what they needed me to do, whether that was like running drugs or jacking skateboards and flipping skateboards, or like going to malls and stealing as much as we could and flipping it for money to throw parties on the block. Like all of that. But for me, that was when I was living with my grandmother, and my grandmother was a drug addict and alcoholic. So when she was doing her shit, I'd just go hang out with the boys in the hood, and we just go run the block, running up on people, stealing skateboards, stealing bikes, going to Payless. We need a new pair of shoes, bro. We'd walk into Payless, we'd take our old shoes off, we'd put new shoes on, we'd walk out, man. Like,
hey, you got some fresh kicks?
Yeah, fresh kicks, my Shacks, so I get my Shacks on. Or my Tony Hawks back in the day, but
Tony Hawks.
Yeah, those were good.
Man.
So that was like living with my grandmother. She was a heavy alcoholic. Like I said in the beginning, she'd drink 640s a day, 2 packs of cigarettes, smoke weed, and do meth at the same time. And her boyfriend at the time, he and I still have a relationship. He's gotten clean and sober and has kind of repented a little bit with me. But my grandmother would, for example, when I was 8 years old, she didn't have anything to give me for a birthday except for 40 ounce of King Cobra and a joint. She lit it up for me and smoked me out on my birthday. Christmas, she bought me a PlayStation. I remember I got a PlayStation. I was ecstatic. I remember I was like, oh my God, I got a PlayStation. I think it was like $200 at the time. And I remember coming home 2 days later, and my grandmother had hawked it at a pawn shop because she ran out of money for beer. And so I'm like, I had that for like a whole week. And I just, they would get high, they'd get drunk, or I'd be, pissed off as a kid, or I'd come home high and drunk, and they'd beat me up for being high and drunk. I'm like, you motherfuckers are the one that gave me this shit. Like, what are you mad at me for? And I remember using like Runaway. I was with my grandma for about 4 years. I was in Polinsky probably 5 or 6 times. Polinsky's an orphanage center in San Diego where the police would take you away from your family and put you in this orphanage center, and another jail-like, literally right next door to juvenile hall. You bunk up with people, you have your room, you have your lunch lines, you go to school, you do what you need to do, you do your chores around the camps. And I just remember multiple times running away. I remember one time I ran away from my grandma's house because they were drunk, and her boyfriend had like took a belt to me and like whooped my ass pretty hard with the belt. And I remember I ran away, and I met these new kids in City Heights, and I had asked to stay the night with them, and because I didn't want to go home. So mom was like, yeah, no problem, stay the night, just like you need to call your parents just to confirm. And I remember grabbing the phone and like dialing the phone number and like hitting end though, and like, hey, faking the phone call, like, hey grandma, I met this guy, and not to sound like that, I met this dude, and like, it's a new friend of mine and I want to stay the night here, can I? Oh yeah, great, I'll be home in the morning, kind of thing. And I just remember the mom was like, well, do you mind if I talk to your grandma? I'm like, oh no, just trying to play it off. I didn't want her to know. And I remember about an hour was going by, all of a sudden the cops showed up and they were like, hey, what's going on, man? And I knew it immediately. They're like, where you live, told me where I was at, and they're like, we need to take you home. And I remember going home, the police escorted me home. They drove me to the house. I told them where I lived and then knocked on the door, and my grandmother and her boyfriend did the oh my God, we're so happy to see you. Like, we didn't know where you were at. Oh my God, yada, yada, yada. And the cops like gave me this spiel about running away and why it's not important and yada. And I didn't give a shit at that time. And I remember they like left me, and as soon as like that door shut, the front door shut, I remember my grandma's boyfriend just got his belt and was like, you motherfucker, like, don't you ever put us in danger like that again. Like, you know what that could have done to us, like if those cops would have find out, and like started whooping my ass. And I remember it was like not even after the door shut, and I just remember hearing the banging, dude. The cops started banging on the door. They're like, open this door now. My grandma went and opened the door, and they got me. They're like, get out. They put my mom's boyfriend or my grandma's boyfriend in cuffs, and then put me in the back of the car, and at 2:00 in the morning took me to Plinsky and took me to the orphanage center. And that was my first time that I was there. And I remember 2 days later, bro, guess who they let me go home with? My grandma and her boyfriend. They came right down 48 hours later. The same people they took me away from were the same people picking me up. So,
and this is a system that's supposed to be protecting you, and they released you right back to the animals.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
that were hurting you.
Oh yeah. I was just like, yeah, cool, man. And I was like, this was every day, and that happened for about 4 years. 3 or 4 times a year I'd be in Felonies, and 2-3 days later they're letting me go right back with the people that they took me away from.
Well, I mean that definitely proves the system's broken. I don't know if it's gotten any much better. I don't know that much about it, but so you 12 years old essentially now.
Mm-hmm.
You're still living with grandma, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was going to school in Claremont. I was actually busing the school because I got kicked out of the city high schools that I were in, because at that point in time it started, my grades had fallen, and I held the record at one of my elementary schools for most referrals ever, but in a single school year, just because of fighting, and I was, every day it was a fight, and they're like, oh man, this guy's trouble, this kid's trouble, he can't be here. But little did they know, they didn't listen to me, dude. I was like, I have no choice, if I don't fight, if they say go fight that dude, like I'd have to go fight that dude, or after school 20 of those dudes are gonna come and I'm gonna get my ass beat. So it's a matter of survival.
Yeah, you're in a matter of survival. Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Exactly.
So you went to Claremont. So you got busted into Claremont.
Busted Claremont. Remember having to get up at 4:30 every morning and riding the bus from City Heights to go to Claremont. I went to Ray Kroc Middle School in Claremont. It's no longer Ray Kroc. I'm not sure what it is now. I know it's still a school, but I think it might be a charter school. Same shit. They're still one of the few white kids in Claremont. It was predominantly Hispanic, a lot of black kids there too. A little bit better than City Heights, but at the same time, like I had grown up in Hispanic and black culture. Like that's who I migrated to. Anytime I'd go to school, I'm like, I knew the Mexicans, I knew the black people. Like that's just where I went. And so, just the same shit, like drugs in the school and like gangs over there. It was a little bit better because they had a boys and girls club that my grandmother was able to get me enrolled into. So after school, I'd watch the boys and girls club, and I'd stay there until about 6:30 at night, and then I'd bus back to City Heights, get home at like 9 p.m., wake up, do it all over again. And it's
fascinating because you're showing a glimpse of your grandmother actually trying to be a good person.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's probably 90% of not good, but there was something in her that was saying like, got to take care of this kid somehow, some way, even though, and again, your grandma's not going to stand up to her boyfriend because she probably got the same treatment if she tried to, right?
Right.
She'd get her ass kicked by her boyfriend.
Yeah.
She
had, it was definitely the drugs and alcohol, man. I mean, in the morning, like you could definitely tell from my grandmother. In the morning, my grandma's up at 6 o'clock. Come on, sweetie, time to get up for school. Take your shower. Here's your clothes. Like, I made you breakfast. I made you lunch. And then would send me on my way. And then by the time I got home from school, 7 o'clock at night, she's already like 300 ounces of beer deep. She's had a shit ton of meth. And she's all wired and fucking pissed off. And like, you little motherfucker. When I'd walk in the house, as soon as I'd come in and just, oh man, it's, my mom still has me like mimic my grandmother sometimes, you know. She's like, do a grandma when she's drunk, you know. And I'll do the little reenactment. She's like, that sounds just like my mom. I'm like, it's a shame I learned that at 10 years old, but yeah, that's pretty much, you know, that's what what it was like living with my grandmother, for sure.
So when did that end? I mean, when did that end? You got kicked out of there, you went to Claremont, and now you're still probably causing a little bit of a ruckus, because that's, you're ingrained into you now. Now it's a matter of just a survival,
right?
But you kind of lost your backup probably, right, when you switched schools.
Yeah, a little bit. So that's kind of, you know, and I had to earn new backup, which is like, you see these stories of all these kids, and it's like they go to different schools, and every new school that they go to, what do? They have to fight. They have to do. And it was like you said, it's because I got kicked out of one school. I lost my backup. So I go to the new school. What do I got to do? I got to prove my ground. I got to stand up. And at this point in time, when I was 12, or when I was in second and third grade, at this point in time, it was just, I walk into class, you look at me wrong, bro, I'm swinging. Like, I don't give a shit. And so I'd walk in, like, some dude was like stared at. I remember walking into like my third grade class, and some guy was like, what's up, white boy? And immediately I was just like, all right. And then we just like went ham. Like, it was my first day at school, and it was just like right in the middle of the classroom, throwing chairs, dude. It's like, that's just what it was, man. I was so used to it. For 5 years of my life, it was like, get your ass beat or beat somebody else's ass, and that's kind of what it was. And I remember at that point in time, I'd kind of earned the reputation, like, don't fuck with me. Like, I might not win the fight, but your boy's not down to back. Like, I won't back down. And so, things had started to progress, and I really wasn't getting messed with a lot in school, but my grades were shit. Like, I didn't care. I didn't have any respect for authority. My teachers, my principals, like, don't care, like, whatever. Like, no adults ever cared for me before, so don't act, save me the shock and all that I don't listen to adults. And so I remember my third grade teacher, Mrs. B, at the time, she had started realizing I was coming home to, I had like bruises on my body, I'd have lashings on my back, I'd have like busted lips all the time, and she's like, what's going on? And I just remember slowly but surely, I started opening up to her, and I kind of told her my situation about my grandmother and what was happening. And I remember that's when she started saying like, hey, like, would you want to stay with me on the weekend at the house? Come live with me. And she was like, I'll talk to your grandmother. And my grandmother started allowing me. So on Friday, you bring a bag of clothes, and then I'd go stay at my third grade teacher's house for the weekend. She'd bring me to school Monday, and then through the week, I would go back to my grandmother's. And all the way through third grade, I remember at the end of the year, she had said, hey, like, do you want to come stay with me for a couple weeks over summer? And I was like, I would love it. Because, third grade teacher, her husband was like an engineer, mechanic, like could build anything. Nice house in Bay Park. Food, I would have food daily. Like, they would take care of me. They had a pool, they had a jacuzzi. She had another son that was like my age, and and it's going over to that house. It was like a family, right? And so I remember showing up at the house. She had picked me up after school on the last day of third grade, and she had taken me to my grandma's house, and she was like, yeah, just pack a bag, whatever, that's what we're gonna do. And I remember leaving the house, and my grandmother was crying, and I was like, what's going on? And my grandmother hugged me, and she's like, you're gonna go stay with Mrs. Fee. I'm giving up custody to let you go live with them. And so I was like kind of shocked, but I wasn't. I was like more ecstatic. I'm like, dude, I'm gonna have my own room. Like, I'm not sleeping in the living room or on the floor anymore, and I'm not waking up to cockroaches crawling on me. And I can open the fridge, and there's gonna be food in there. And so I remember staying there. That's when I moved into her place at third grade summer year, and they went through the adoption process, and took about a year and a half, but they had finally adopted me at that point in time. So going into fourth grade year and fifth grade year, I was adopted, living in a new home, and that was awesome, living there with the family. But I had my trouble. I still had my roots tied to City Heights, and I'd bust to City Heights to go see my grandmother, but I was really just hanging out with the boys. And they tried to do everything that got me in sports. I was baseball, football, whatever I wanted to do, like summer camps, sailing camps down in Bay Park, like everything. They gave me everything I wanted, but I had just been so conditioned. I wasn't mature enough to understand really what I had, and I kept going back to where I was more comfortable at. Because as a child, I kind of was like, when does this end? Like, when are they gonna lose interest in me? When is the abuse gonna start? So I didn't trust them. I loved the environment, but I wasn't able to trust them fully. So I kept going back to, the gangs in City Heights, and started coming home drunk, started coming home smelling like weed, and started coming home with like chains and new skateboards. Every weekend I had a new skateboard or a scooter, and like, where are you getting this stuff? I'm like, oh, my grandmother. And they're like, nah, like, we took you out of your grandma's house for a reason. And then that's when I started like really acting out there, because they were like, you're not going back to City Heights. And I'm like, nobody tells me what I'm doing. And
You don't
I'm
understand.
13, I know
I
it's
am the
best for me.
authority.
I was like, I run my life. So, that's when shit started getting a little sideways at the house, and I was going through like deep counseling. They were putting me in counseling, and they put me on some severe antidepressants. I remember they put me on adult dose Prozac when I was 11 years old. And I was literally a zombie, man. I remember I'd take it, and like, so I wouldn't talk to anybody. I was fall right asleep. And I remember going to my grandmother's house one weekend. She found the bottle of Prozac, and she's like, "The fuck is this?" And I was like, "Oh, it's antidepressants, like yada yada yada." And like, this is just what I need to get through and cope. And my grandma's like, "You don't need drugs and medicine." She's like, "You don't need this. Like, nothing's wrong with you. You're fine. Here's a beer, and here's a cigarette, and here's a joint." And she'd hand it to me, and I'd come home smelling like weed. And I'm like, "Hey, did you take your pills over the weekend?" And they weren't gone. And like, yeah, I did, but I didn't know that they knew how to count. So, and so that's started to spiral really quick over there, for sure.
How long did you live with them?
About a year and a half, 2 years. And I remember my mom, so I didn't know this at the time, but my mom had gotten into some pretty bad trouble, and she got taken to prison, and then she was on probation for 5 years. So when I was 13 years old, my adopted mom, Mary, decided that she was going to help my mom move back to California, because she thought what I needed is to be reconnected with my mom. And so she flew my mom back out from Texas, helped my mom move back, paid for whatever, and my mom moved right back into my grandmother's house. So you take a recovering addict, and then you put them right back in a situation where drugs and alcohol are being. And so I started going there, and I was like, dude, like, I hadn't seen my mom since I was 7. So mind you, for 6 years, every year, my mom never told me the truth. Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays, holidays, New Year's, 4th of July, everything. My mom would call me, "Hey, I'm going to be there this week. I'm going to see you on your birthday. I'm going to see you on Christmas. I'm going to see you here. I'm going to see you there." She would never show up. For 6 years straight, she would never show up. So when she was finally there, I was ecstatic to see my mom. But that was also one of the biggest curses too, because all I wanted to do was be with my mom. But my mom was living with my grandmother, and once they started seeing that my mom was living with my grandmother, and my mom was, not doing what she needed to do, they could tell my mom was not clean. They started limiting and said, like, you can't go to your mom's, you can't go see your mom, you can't go see your grandmother. And that's just when, I turned into a little shit. I was sneaking out of the house. I was stealing from them. I was stealing from my brother at the time. I was anything I could do to get some bus money to go back to City Heights to hang out with my mom. My mom had a car. She would pick me up, in the middle of the night, and I'd come back in the morning, and I'd smell like Black & Miles, because my mom loves smoking Black & Miles. So I'd have a pack of Black & Miles, and so it's 101 proof schnapps, and smelling like weed, all my clothes day. And they just were like, you know what? They're like, if you want to be with your mom, they threw in the towel on me, for sure. They gave me up. They relinquished custody and gave me back to my mom when I was about 12 years old.
No, that's a difficult process for a family to go through, right? And they're doing it by the gracious of God and the goodness of their heart. Yeah. And they're trying. And I'm sure you can look back and reflect today and go, hey, thank you for giving me a glimpse of normalcy.
Yeah.
At the time, that was not normalcy. That was just like, what the hell are you guys trying to do? You're just trying to control me.
Right.
You've been controlled, but not controlled.
Right.
You've been abused, controlled.
Right.
You've never been in a functional, healthy, living environment.
100%.
And, you don't know how to really react to that kind of environment. I feel you, man. My mom was not there.
Yeah.
After my parents got divorced, I feel you, man. She was gone. She'd say, "Hey, I'm coming up."
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. You fucking getting ghosted, man.
Yeah.
Not showing up, birthdays, the whole 9 yards, man. I get it. Yeah. And that plays a huge, huge psychological effect on people. But you went down a way different path.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, man. And so you went back to living with your mom.
Mm-hmm.
And now what? I mean,
Yeah.
now you're back in. Now you're back. You went from this healthy environment ish,
Yeah.
other than you sneaking out and seeing your boys and your grandma and stuff,
Yeah.
to now you're full back fledged into the abuser, the
City
predator,
Heights, gangs, dude, I mean,
like
all of it. Getting back to my mom, I mean, right back into the same household that we were living in. The same house where I got taken out of. We were back into that place, and just going down the path of, getting, at this time I'm like 11, 12, 13 years old, and now I'm getting a little bit older. I'm getting a little bit bigger, and starting to run drugs, and started going around having to carry a shank on me, and just like to protect myself in City Heights, and just kind of becoming the gang that we were in. That was the guys. Now I was in middle school, and these guys are like graduating high school, so we're talking 18 year old dudes with 12, 13-year-old kids just kind of running around City Heights. And my mom had, about 6 months later, my mom gets locked up in jail and living with my grandmother, and again with her boyfriend, going through the same thing at 12 and 13. But at this point in time, like my mom, they're like, oh, you're mature, you can handle this now. So now my grandmother's like sending me out to go do, here's $20, go meet up with this person at the gas station, bring me back what they're going to give you, kind of shit. And I'm like picking drugs up for my kid and for my mom at 12 or 13 years old. And that kind of was like back and forth, same thing. They take me to Polinsky, they take me away for 2 days, and then boom, they'd give me right back to my mom. And then they'd take me away for 2 days, and then boom, they'd take me right back to my mom. And so up until about, I think I was like 12, I was a freshman in high school. And I remember they had finally decided to start taking me to court, and for my mom to gain custody. Like, they're like, this is the point in time where like, you got to put your shit together. Like, you got to get it going. Like, this is like, we're going to take your kid away from you. And she's like, okay. And she'd enter a program, and then they'd give me back, and then she'd leave the program. And so I remember at like 12 years old, I had told my mom, and I was like, leaving the courthouse, they had let me go. And with my mom, and I told her, I don't want to go back, Mom. I was like, I'm over it. I don't want to live with you anymore. I'm like, no, just let me go, is pretty much what I told her. I remember driving in El Cajon on the 8 freeway, and she was shit-faced, drunk. And I remember she had started breaking down, sobbing and crying, and this whole nine, and she almost got into a car accident, and we almost got into a really bad car accident. She was going 110 on the freeway, shit-faced drunk. It was just really bad. But when we went to court the next day, she said, my son doesn't want to live with me anymore. Go ahead, take him away. And that's when they put me in a foster home, freshman year of 8th grade, pretty much 8th grade, yeah.
8th grade, you went to a foster home, and now you're in a different place.
Yeah. Well, I mean, actually, I forget this part, dude. I mean, I was in it was 8th grade graduation, actually. I was rehearsing 8th grade graduation with my class. I think it was like 2003, and I remember it was the day before middle school graduation. We were going through the rehearsals of 8th grade graduation. I remember just looking back, and I saw 2 sheriffs and 2 people in suits walking up, and I'm like, that's for me. I knew it right away, because at that time, my mom was also in a rehab facility, but she had met another dude, like she had done when I was 2 years old, and we were in this clean and sober living house. And she had actually left me and my sister abandoned for about 6 months. So for about 6 months, the last 6 months of 8th grade, didn't know where my mom was at, sleeping on park benches and in and out of these clean and sober livings. Like, hey, you can't be here. Your mom's not here. And there was another family that was in there clean and sober. They're like, we're not going to let you sleep on the street. So like, they would let us sleep on the floor, kind of let us stay in the house. And I remember the cops and CPS pulled up the day before 8th grade graduation, and were like, we're looking for Shane Pinson. And they pointed me out, and they pretty much walked me out of school at that time. And everybody had kind of known. I was pretty transparent with my story at the time too. So as soon as they took me away, I remember like all my friends ran up to me, hugging me, crying, and like, wherever we're at, just like, make sure you get a hold of us, let us know what's going on. And I had got taken away, and they put me in Polinsky. I'm like, damn, man. I was talking to the sheriff. I'm just like, you guys are really going to take me away on 8th grade graduation? Like, at least, like, I don't get to walk with my friends. Like, I don't get to say bye. I don't get to say anything. And that sheriff actually picked me up from Polinsky the next morning, took me to Target, bought me an outfit. Because I had one pair of clothes. I had one pair of reversible shorts, and I had a t-shirt and one pair of underwear and one pair of socks. I used to wash all my clothes in the sink at night, and then I would dry them over the stove, the fire stove. And that's how I got clean clothes. And I remember he had bought me pretty much some nice clothing and said, hey, look, like, you're going to graduate with your friends. And I remember he took me to school, and I remember walking up, dude, and like the whole class went crazy. Like, walked in there and everybody was like loving on me, and I got to walk, and like it was definitely a cool moment. That was like the first time where I definitely felt love. And but after that, I got placed into a foster home after graduation, actually in Santee, and the sheriff was like, I'm going to make sure you stick around for once, because I told him that from first grade to eighth grade I had went to different schools every single year. And so I told him that I'd never been to a consecutive school, and he's like, we're gonna get you somewhere. We're gonna keep you close. And although Lakeside goes to El Cap, like, he put me in Santee, so I went to Santana freshman year, and I did 4 years at Santana, which was awesome. But I still was in 3 different placements during high school too. So that journey goes on its own little thing too.
Did the cop at least keep up and keep track of you, kind of where you're at, and kind of kept in touch with you?
For a little bit.
And made sure you're all right, not getting abused like you were before?
Yeah. I was in a pretty good foster home when I got into freshman year of high school. I was in this home. There were 6 of us, 6 boys. And once again, I'm the only white boy in the house. And so all the Mexicans, man, they want to fuck with the wedo, you know?
Yeah.
And so I, for about a year and a half, man, I was just like, every day it was like me and my foster brothers were like bombing on each other, like in the backyard. But, over that time we had gotten acclimated to each other, and like things were going good with us. And we had, we were all about modding our bikes, like sick rims. There's a bike store in Santee over there across the street from Round Table and Avalanche, I think it was called. And they used to go in there and like get stickers, get the new spokes, get our new, pedals. Like, man, we were just riding around Santee all of our whole time. And that was fun. But Santee in 2004, 2002, they had the school shooting, and Santee was nicknamed Clanty. And I was like, I go from being the only white kid in my school, walking South Pole, FUBU, like all this shit. And I go into Santee, and I go to show up to Santana, and it's like SRH and Cottonmouth Kings, and like all these like props, like these like red bills, red and white, like white power kind of stuff. And I was like, man, dude, like, what the hell? And I remember I just migrated. There's about 20 or 30 Mexicans and black people in my school. And I was like, that's my squad. Like, that's what I go to. And I remember freshman year of high school, it was the freshman orientation. It was the Friday before school started on Monday. And I migrated over to the Mexican and black crowd, and that's just where I was at. I remember I was walking around with those guys, and one of the seniors there was like, hey, man, like, pretty much called me a race trader. He's like, you're a race trader, man. You're hanging out with those da-da-da-da's, right? And I was like, I don't know who you think you're talking to. And he's like, you're either going to go with us or you're going to go with them. But if you go with them, we're going to handle it. And I was like, after school? I'm like, why wait till after school? I was like, let's get it right now. And like, we're literally in the class, dude, with like 2 seniors, and we just went ham, dog. Like, me and these 2 seniors, like I remember vividly, these 2 seniors were there, and they were like kind of like trying to strong arm me, and he's like, I'm gonna get my boys and we're gonna jump you. I'm like, you're gonna need as much help as you can get. I was like, let's make it interesting, because you and me one-on-one is not, I was like, it's not gonna end well for you. So I'm like, bring some friends, like, and so I actually got suspended on Friday. They brought me in for fighting, and I remember there's like on Monday you're not allowed to come to school until Wednesday, and then immediately I was put into I forget what it's called, but they put you in like the detention. And so I had 2 weeks of detention before I even started high school. They were like, this kid is like, immediately it was like, this kid's trouble, man. And so hey, it is what it is, bro. Like, I didn't get
listen, welcome to my environment.
You're not gonna fuck with me. I don't care if I'm a freshman.
Yeah, those kids didn't know who the fuck they were messing with.
No.
You're like, hey, listen, you might be in this world, but welcome to mine. And I'll introduce you to it.
100%, man, 100%.
Man. So that's awesome, dude. Well, we're gonna take a break.
Okay.
All right. I'm your host, Dustin Hayes. And the show wouldn't be made possible without our sponsors. Dude, so you went through fucking a childhood that nightmare movies are made of, man.
Yeah, and we barely got through middle school.
And we barely just got through middle school. We just touched on high school.
Yeah.
You know, but you ended up in college with a scholarship.
Yeah.
Like how did that happen? Because usually somebody from your background is not going to be coming into college with a scholarship.
Yeah.
Unless you have some athletic capabilities, which obviously you became to know somehow. How did that relate, and how did you get into athletics? So
I pretty much remember after I got suspended freshman year of high school, my principal shot it to me straight. I had opened up about my childhood, and I told him at that point in time, I was like, "What's up, man? Like, you seem very angry." And so told him everything. Like, I didn't care at this point. And so I remember he's just like, "Look, dude," he's like, "it sounds like you need to take some frustration out on some things." I was like, "I'd love to." He goes, "Why don't you try out for the football team?" And I was like, "All right, sign me up." And so I remember showing up to practice, and I didn't know anything about football. I like watching football, but I've never played football in my life. So they're like, "What do you like to do?" He's like, "What do you like to do?" And I was like, "I don't know." And he's like, "Do you want to catch the ball, run the ball?" And I was like, "I don't know." And he's like, "How about hitting people?" And I was like, "I'd love to hit people." And he's like, "It sounds like you should be a linebacker." And so I remember showing up to practice, and they put me in. He's like, I was like, "I don't know what I'm doing, coach." And he's like, "See ball, get ball." And I remember they ran like it was a little trap play. I just remember the running back getting that ball, dude, in first play I ever had, dude. Boom, in the hole, knocked him, 3-yard loss, TFL. My linebacker coach was like, "We got a spot for you, baby." And so I remember then that's when I was like middle linebacker. It was like see ball, get ball. That was like the first thing I latched onto. And I just was not afraid. I was not afraid to go hit anybody. And back then you could do Oklahoma drills, V drills, and go heads up with people. And we had this dude named Daniel Carroll, and he's my boy still today. We still talk about it. I mean, he kind of that's another guy we should get on the podcast. But he kind of went through some shit. But this dude was like 6 foot, 210 pounds as a freshman, like just an absolute tank. And everybody was afraid to go heads up with this guy. And I'm like 130 pounds, dude. And I'm like 5'7", still growing into my frame, and got these pads on that are bigger than me. Looked goofy as shit. And I remember we were in like V drills, right? And people are counting. He's the guy that people count. They're like, "Okay, there's 3 people here." And then they were like, "There's 3 people. Oh, fuck." And I remember this one guy was like, "Hey, man," I was right behind him, and he's like, "Hey, you should go ahead of me," because he knew like Daniel Carroll was right there. And I was like, "Let me get Daniel. I don't give a shit." And so got lined up. Me and Daniel looked, and like Daniel put me on my ass, dude, but I brought him down with me. And I remember he helped me up, and he's like, "I fucking love you, bro." And like got up, and he's like, "You're the shit, dude." And he smacked me on my head, and like kind of earned the respect of the team at that time. I just wasn't the guy that wasn't gonna get back down from anybody. And so me and him like still talk about that day. He's like, "I remember seeing your little goofy ass, and I thought I was gonna run you over." And he's like, "I ran you over, but you're the first dude to bring me down." So it was football that turned your life around. Really, it was that principal sitting you down and going, "You know what? You're angry. I got something for you. You want to leave your anger out? Man, let's make this a powerhouse." Yeah. And flipped you around, put you in football, and that just kind of
did that transition you out of like the riffraff and be like, you know what, you're right, I should probably leave that behind?
Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit?
A little bit.
Yeah.
So freshman year, I remember freshman year, that was kind of like when shit got going. And I had like a really good year, and like that's when things were like fun for me. And I was going to school, I'd kind of earned a reputation like on this, I developed a lot of haters too at that one, because I was this guy that didn't know how to play football, and all of a sudden, I skipped Hell Week, I skipped all this camp. And it's like, it took me like 3 days in practice, and then all of a sudden I'm a starting linebacker. And then freshman year, they had Daniel Carroll was also a linebacker. So his spot was occupying that. So they put me at corner, but pretty much same thing. So I played freshman year corner, and that was like really good. But when football season ended, I was like, what do I do? And it was literally like right back to City Heights, taking the bus back to City Heights, hanging out with the old crew again, getting into a shit ton of trouble, fighting, like no outlet. And it's freshman year of high school, probably the latter half of the year, I had gone back to pretty much City Heights where I was at, and found out that the crew that I was rolling with had moved to another city in San Diego, Jacumba. And so I had started taking some trips out to Jacumba and hanging out with them. And I had one night we got the bright idea, we were all shit-faced and drunk and high, and we were like, dude, let's go break into houses. And so we started breaking into houses, and like we got away with it once, we got away with it twice, and then on the third time we were like, let's go all in. So we broke into this really nice house, stole everything, like jewelry, TVs, guns, stereo systems at the time were pretty big, like boom boxes, like all kind of, all these things. And we're like in Jacumba in the mountains, man, and we were there that night, and we were like hanging out, we're throwing a party, we thought we were the shit. We had like 3 or 4 handguns, like 200 rounds of ammunition, shit ton of jewelry, nothing but gold, silver, and diamonds. And we thought we pretty much hit a lick and thought we were about to make it. And remember about a week later, I was sitting at so backtrack on that. I had gone with them because the foster home that I was in previously, I had bought one of my foster brothers again and beat him up pretty badly. And they're like, this guy he can't be here. So I had literally just gotten transitioned from that foster home to another foster home. And in that same weekend is when I broke into that house. And so I was supposed to be in this new placement, and it was like 3 days I'm in this house, and the sheriff showed up to my house. They're like, oh, we're looking for Shane Pinson. And they were like, okay, what's going on? And sat me down in the living room, and I told my foster parents what had happened. I was like, yep, broke into the house, stole a bunch of jewelry, stole a bunch of handguns and whatever. And they're like, well, you're being arrested. This is what we're going to do. And they took me back to the station, and they had interviewed me and go and kind of like talk me through the process. And at that time, it was actually criminal to steal. They didn't let people off like they do now, and it was every $900 was a felony account. And I had racked up 17 felonies when I was 13 years old. I was looking at 17 years at 14 years old, I was looking at 17 years in jail for the amount of theft with jewelry. It was about $20,000 in jewelry, illegal possession of handguns, 150 rounds of ammunition, all this shit. So I was like, the family had come to the station and was talking to me, and they kind of like wanted to know. I had told the sheriffs my story, and I was like, hey, like, this is what's going on, this is why I did it, like, I'm not making excuses, like, I take whatever punishment I get, like, it is what it is. And the family came into the room, and they're like, look, like, the laptops and cameras that you took from us, those have photos of my parents meeting their grandchildren for the first time, because their parents were pretty much terminal. So they had flown home to allow them to meet their grandchildren before they passed away, and they had all the photos. And so the camera and the laptop I had stolen, that had all the memories on there. So like the only thing we want back is that, like, kind of hit me in the heart. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to jail. Like, might as well tell you where it's at. We had taken it to the mountains, and we dug a hole, threw it in a garbage bag, and then buried it in the mountains. And so that night I had taken the cops on a little journey and showed them where it was at, got the shovels, found the bags, retrieved all the jewelry, all the guns, all the laptops were still working, everything. And that night they had said like, hey man, like you did a good thing for sure, but you still have to show up, do your thing. Like there's still going to be a process. And so I remember going to my foster parents' house, John and Cindy, who I actually just left their house this morning. I still talk to them. And, they dropped me back off, figured I wasn't a flight risk. I was 12, like I'm not going to drive anywhere. And so they let me stay there. And my foster dad is like, look, man, like whatever it is, he's like, you're a good kid. You kind of went through some shit. And at the end of the day, you're going to have to pay the piper. Whatever happens, like I'll make sure he told me whatever happens, like I'll be there for you regardless. And I was like, all right, cool. So I remember that week I had went to court and we were doing all the sentencing, and it was pretty much slam dunk. I mean, I admitted to everything. I gave everything back. Like there was no reason for a trial. And we went into court, and then they stood me up for sentencing. And the judge, was like, gave me the spiel about everything that I had done, told me what I was looking at, 17 years in prison. And I remember him standing there, and he's like, but, and I was like, what? And then the family had stood up, and he's like, they want to say something. And they said, hey man, like we understand that you've gone through some real life shit. You've gone through some trauma, but you're a good kid and you returned all the stuff. You were honest. You didn't lie about anything. You were open book. You gave us our things back and we're forever grateful. And they're like, you're a kid that needs an opportunity. You need a shot. And so they decided to drop all the charges against me. They didn't pursue charges, and that they pretty much said, we'll do this as long as you promise us that you'll make a difference in the world. And I said, I promise, and dropped all the charges. And the judge said, don't fuck it up. And he said, if you get into any kind of trouble with the law ever again, he goes, I promise you, I will bring down the hammer on you. And that was 13 years old, and they were going to put me back in the foster system and put me back in Polinsky. And my foster dad, who I was temporary with, was like, I'll take him. And like literally was in the stands or whatever you want to call it, and was in the room. And he's like, he's got a spot in my house if he wants it. And I was like, I want to go with him. And I went back to him, and that was like the turning point for me.
That right there, seeing that like second chance going, probably should start transitioning away from this life of nefariousness and really, maybe take it seriously, because you could have had some serious time and just been in jail really from 13 to whenever.
Yeah. And who knows? Knowing my background, I would have just got right in jail and just picked up right where I got off. And
it's the same environment.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the same environment. There's really nothing different, right?
Yeah.
Other than just being institutional. Oh my gosh. Having a mini stroke here. Institutionalized. It's okay. I'll get it out eventually. Listen, I can't use big words. Okay, I'm from Oklahoma. Small words.
My vocabulary ends at ABC 1, 2, 3. Cat, dog. That's about as far as it goes.
That's it, man. You throw an S on some bitch, I'm gone. Yeah, that's good. That's good that they actually stood up, and those people that you burglarized and stole their shit, invaded their privacy, was like, hey, I see some good in this kid. I'm not going to press charges.
Yeah.
And that set the tone. Kind of from that moment on, you started transitioning away from that life. Like, and you dropped your boys and all that stuff and was like, hey, I'm not doing this. And your foster parents was like, okay, we're going to help you out. And did you stay with them throughout the high school and all that stuff too? Yeah,
I stayed with them until I aged out of the system. They, he made sure, like I told him, like we lived in Lakeside, El Cajon area, and I was still going to Santana. And he's like, look, man, like, where do you want to go to school? And I was like, I'd really like to go to Santana, establish a friendship there. I've never been 2 consecutive years. So he literally drove 30 minutes every morning to make sure that I went to the same school in Santana for the school year. And then, we ended up moving to Santee for it, so I could be closer to my school and my friends, because I'd still want to go hang out with my football buddies over there, but he'd have to take me over there. So he was like, why don't we just pack up and move to Santee, and moved me to Santee so I could be around my football buddies. And he, saw that, sports is kind of what got me acclimated. And some of my best friends today that are going to be in my, best man and my groomsmen are some of the friends that I made freshman year of high school. And so he saw how important those guys were to me, and made sure that I was able to stick around there.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. So you against all odds, you graduated high school. See,
Yeah.
you did something, and you went through hell a lot more in childhood than I did, and I didn't graduate fucking high school. But you
Yeah.
stuck through this, man, and
Yeah.
all odds, and graduated high school. Ended up getting a scholarship to go to college.
Yeah. So I was supposed to go to Western Washington. I was looking in, went through some camps with some buddies and like the different educational systems in different states. And my college counselors or my high school counselors like, yeah, man, like you can do football, and helping me fill out the process, the whole nine. And then week 6 of the NFL football season, week 6 of the high school football season, second play of the game, dude, I snapped my leg. I was starting linebacker, starting center. And I remember I was down blocking on the nose tackle, and my right tackle had thrown his end, and my leg had planted and hit me dead on, dude, and snapped my leg backwards. And I remember just feeling all four. I had the full triangle tear. I felt all 4 pops on there, and I just remember like being on the ground, withering in pain. I'm like, "There's no way, man." I'm like, "No, like no," and tore everything in my knee, and I was going to go to talk to Western Washington, and they're like, "Look, like you could still come here, but it's going to be on a walk-on basis. Like recovery is going to be a bitch. You're going to pay out of school tuition. You're not going to have healthcare coverage," because being a foster care, I only had healthcare in the state that I was in. So it was just like Washington wasn't going to be the place. And so I remember I finished out senior year. I got surgery at the end of the year of high school. And my buddy was like, "Why don't you go try walking on to Grossmont Junior College?" And so I walked on to Grossmont Junior College, and 2 months, dude, 2 months after surgery on my knee, man, full reconstruction, bro. Slapped on it like got my David Goggins on, bro. I had my knee brace and duct tape, and showed up to practice and just went out there and balled out, man. Same thing, put me a middle linebacker. I was like 4th, 5th string, and they had this Polynesian dude. He was like 5'7", 310 pounds, playing fullback. And I remember we were on a scout team, and they would try to run a little ISO up the hole, dude. And I fucking came down, dude, put that dude on his ass, man, and put it. Then they got another tackle for a loss, put him on there. And then when I went through my physical, they were like, "You did what?" They're like, "You had surgery when?" And I was like, "Yeah, I had surgery 2 months ago." And then it's like June 6th, I had my surgery, and it's like August 20th, and camp's getting ready to start. And they're like, "No, like you're not supposed to be out here." So I ended up having a gray shirt for that year. But I remember specifically going in, I was talking to my academic counselor, and they're helping me out with classes. And they were like, "You're a foster kid?" And I was like, "Yeah, I was out of the system." Like, "You're in the wrong department, man." And it's like, okay, whatever, tell me where I need to go. And so they had the EOPS program for junior college, an extended opportunity program for students. And I went in there, and they were like, "Oh, you're a foster kid? Good thing you blew out your knee, because you would have went to Washington and lost all your privileges. But because you're aged out of the system as a foster kid, you get free education. We're going to help you find your own place." They found me an apartment, paid for my apartment, paid for my books, paid for my tuition, and paid for me to be there while I was there. And I was like, literally, like, I had no idea that this was even a thing. Like, I'm sleeping on my friend's floor because I had nowhere to go after I had aged out of the system, because I had all these plans. And it's like, now all of a sudden I have all these opportunities open up to me at Grossmont. So got that figured out, went through my rehab, started training, still showed up to practice, did my coaching, went through what I need to go through. And then when spring ball came around, I was healthy. And that's kind of when I started playing I was still playing at Grossmont. Did my shit, second string the next year, and then ended up being a team captain my sophomore season.
So yeah, man. So you went to college. You graduated college with a degree in what?
So I went Grossmont Junior College. I got my AA, and then I went to Kansas, and I finished my undergrad at Humboldt State for bachelor's in criminal justice.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Why criminal justice?
I really wanted to be in law enforcement, and I wanted to be a part of, I saw law enforcement a lot when I was a kid, and nobody really helped. And so I really wanted to use that as an opportunity for me to go in those like dark situations and be a light for these kids. So that's kind of why I went through that route for criminal justice. And, I really wanted to be a difference maker. I had made that promise, and I had realized like I had gotten through it, and that's why I wanted to go through criminal justice.
That's crazy. So through this whole experience in your life, you never become a drug addict?
No, I mean, I had my struggles with, I smoked weed, and that was kind of how I coped.
Yeah.
I drank, obviously,
Sure.
what high school kid doesn't. Post, high school, college, I mean, I could say I maybe battled a little bit with cocaine, but that was more like party scene. I wasn't doing it every night. It was more social. But
Yeah,
yeah,
you
I
weren't
just,
locking yourself in the room and fucking give you that white powder.
yeah, no, I
You know?
wasn't. No, I
Yeah.
wasn't Tony Montana. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So,
Yeah.
no, never. I never. I had experiences with like meth. It's like my cousins when I was younger, and then my mom being around it, and then being in those trap houses. Like, definitely was like hit the pipe a couple times. I was like, and that shit, like hallucinogens for me is like a nightmare, man. I immediately go back into those worlds that I was in, and I remember one time I had experimented with the drug, and I went nuts, dude. I thought I was in hell for sure. And like, I was like in my room, like with my head, covering my head. And like, I felt like I had spiders and snakes just crawling all over me. And I was like, no, I'm good, man. Like, I don't,
Yeah. Not for me.
no. And, I was younger in these trap houses. My mom and her, they would shoot meth too. And when we were in these rooms, they would like lock me and my sisters in the closet. And part of the torture was is if me and my sister would come out of the closet, all these tweakers would actually chase me and my sister around with needles, and they'd fucking jam us with needles when I was like a child. And they'd pin me and my sister into a corner of the wall and like literally would tower over us and like poke us with needles and like try to like scare us into like, don't come out, and they were holding it. So that's another reason why I don't do needles.
What the fuck, man?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So thank God for that app. So that, that portion of it.
Dude, I'm at a loss for fucking words. I really am, dude. I mean, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Fucking monsters, dude.
Yeah, for sure.
So I got this like movie playing in my head of you saying that as you described it. And I'm just like, and that's hard to get out. That's like a real life thing. Like, those are the people we have to fucking get rid of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like seriously.
Put them on an island and fucking blow it up, man.
Yeah, man.
Dude, I still have, like, even going in for my surgeries, like when I had my knee surgery, my shoulder surgery, or like just the anesthesiologist, man. Like, I remember my knee surgery, I got so worked up knowing that a needle was going to enter my body that I passed out before they even hit me with it. Like, I had the heart rate monitor on. Like, they had to stop. My heart rate spiked to an unhealthy rate, and they had to pull me out of the room. And like, I was sweating, dude, and I was like hyperventilating and having an anxiety attack. And I remember I was going in again. I was like, oh boy. And I just remember I woke up, and then the next day, or I woke up after surgery, and they're like, you passed out before we could even put the needle in you. I was like, and that's how terrified of needles I was in my life.
How did you get past all that stuff and over all that stuff? And did it follow you in your first? How did you get past that? How did you heal yourself from it?
One day at a time, man. And just knowing that I had already gone through it for sure. I mean, I still deal with it daily. There's, it leads into my relationships. It leads into me running my own business daily. I still have trust issues with my lady, and it's not her fault. We go through counseling with that and pastoral care at church. And one of my mentors is one of the pastors at Awaken Church in San Diego, and they, just kind of helping me get through that trauma. And we have an event called Emerge, where every year we go out. It's about 3,000 dudes from all different campuses from all over the country go out to Campo out in San Diego, and it's a 3-day church conference. It's only dudes, and we do these things called burden boards, and we get a 2x4 and we tie it to our back, and we write down all of our traumas, and then we do our prayer thing. We go through services, we do competitions, and then at the end of the night we look at the burden boards, and we say what we're struggling with, and then we pray over it, and then we burn the burden. And this last one is my third trip that I went. This last time I went to was, because I'll be super happy, and then something will trigger me, and all of a sudden I'm dark, quiet, don't want to talk to anybody, and I'm just having a memory or something. And so what the last advice I got was from my buddy Brent, and he was like, man, he's like, it seems like, he's like, you cut the branches of the tree off of what is hindering you and slowing you down, right? But the tree can regrow its roots. And if your roots are bad, if your roots are not healed, then you're always going to grow bad branches. So what he, taught me and what he helped me understand was like, what you need to do is like, get into meditation, get into prayer. And then when you're praying, like go back into that house, go back and find that child in that memory that you had that different root. And then like, as yourself, go talk to that younger self and then pray and then talk to that person and connect with that child and let them know that they're all right. And like, once you start fixing the roots, when you cut off those branches, once the roots are fixed, you're going to have nothing but good branches. And so for the past 3 months, like anytime I'm at church, anytime I'm praying, anytime anything that relates to me, like even in a movie, man, like I'll find it and I'll go, okay, cool. So when I go and pray, like I enter the house that little kid has locked himself into, and I enter it, and I envision myself at first like the kid not opening the door, so I'm talking to him from the other side of the door, like letting him know things are cool, and then the door is like open, and then now I'm walking with this kid. Like I literally envision myself walking around with my younger self, and then going room by room and kicking the door open and saying, boom, like this door of anger, or this door of like not trusting anybody, and like letting him know, like, and like literally walking with him in my brain, and like walking through the room and like cleansing the rooms each one time. So that's lately what I've been doing, but I mean that's taken 10 years for me to finally figure out. So
well, it's a lifelong I mean, therapy. It's not just, hey, I've done 3 things in 3 different days and I'm healed from it. Like a lifelong of trauma is going to take a lot of work and patience and understanding, from your loved ones and your relationships that you're going to have with women and family too. Yeah. So it's not just, your wife or your fiance, but it's also I think that was her. Yeah. But it's also it's a lifelong commitment to stay there. Yeah. And to keep continuing to be that better person. For sure. And you said, and you nailed it, you said it kind of still has an effect on your relationships. Mm-hmm. And, we spoke about it earlier, but your father was never in the picture. Never. And he died in your driveway when you were like 1 year old. Body was dumped, wrapped in a carpet, dumped. Obviously he was in some bad stuff, right? Yeah. I mean, he was not a good, a good person. Probably wouldn't have been a good role model for you anyhow. Yeah. I mean, that's, you look at it, like I have sympathy for people that are like that, because you look at it and you're like, you're not born that way. It's definitely your environment, and it's just like the world. Like I had every reason to go down that path. I have every reason to be this similar parent, that my mom was, that my dad was, that my grandmother was to me. And like, I struggle with that, but I know that as a person, like I hate those kind of people. So that's like every day I wake up, I'm like, I don't know what to do, but I absolutely know what not to do. And that's kind of like where I keep my mindset at, is like, as long as I'm not doing that shit, like I'm 10 times better. The fact that my kid's turning 8 years old this month and he still has a dad in his life, like he doesn't like that. I struggle with that, because I'm like, dude, you have no idea what I went through. You know what I mean? Like, so he's like, oh man, I didn't get this Pokemon cards. I'm like, motherfucker, I didn't even have food. Like, my 8th birthday, I got a Mad Dog or King Cobra and a joint. Listen, you're getting a Coca-Cola and a birthday cake and a party and some Pokemon cards. Yeah.
I'm like, you're on YouTube, man.
And some new kicks.
For sure. I'm like, man, that's what I still struggle with, man.
Man, they don't understand. They don't understand where we've been and what we've been through to
100%
to go through that, and they kind of take it for granted a little bit. Yeah. So your dad wasn't around, but didn't you find out something kind of recent about your father?
Yeah. So my mom told me, I had tried to get acclimated to my dad's side of the family, and it's just always like square peg, round hole kind
Yeah.
of thing, and never got really acclimated with the family. And the grandmother on the my dad's mom on that side like really tried, but I don't know, everything just kind of felt off. My mom, my one birthday, I think it was like my 28th birthday, my mom was like, well, it's a good thing California didn't let me have my 6th abortion because you wouldn't have been born. And I'm like, okay, thanks, mom. Like, that's the kind of shit I get on my birthday. Okay, so when my kid's bitching that the cake's blue, not red, kind of thing, I'm like, but she didn't put him on my dad on my birth certificate, and I'm like, there's probably a reason for that. And she said that she had told me, she's like, yeah, there was 5 candidates. So I'm like, it's not a fucking game show, but all right, thanks, mom. And so my girl, she's like, hey, she's like, have you ever thought about doing a DNA test? And I was like, no. I was like, because what am I gonna find? Like more drug addicts in my family. Like, I'm like, I'd rather just start over. I got the Pinson name. I'm the last male Pinson in my family. Like, my bloodline, I was the last male Pinson. And so I took really great pride in that, and like being like, look, man, like the female Pinsons are gonna die off, but the male Pins, I'm gonna be the pillar that's gonna like really branch out and recreate this name. And so she's like, okay, whatever. So Christmas, I unwrapped this present. It's a DNA test, and I'm like, I put it off for like 6 weeks. And I was like, I'm not taking this shit. And like, I don't know why. And I was like, I don't want to know because I didn't want to figure it out. So, anyways, I take the test, and time goes by, and I remember getting the notification that the test results are back, and that I had matched with some family members. And I was like, okay. So I look at it, and my mom had never taken the DNA test. So when it does the tree, comes down 23andMe, it goes mom, unidentified, whatever. And then it goes dad, uncle. And it goes, you match with an uncle. And I was a 25% blood match. And the last name was Schmidt. And I was like, I don't know Schmidt. Like, and I went on there, and it was like 25% blood relative. And like me, I know math. I'm like, okay, so that's my uncle, which means you're my dad's brother. But none of these names are, and he had his kids and his grandkids and his nieces and nephews. And I'm like, I don't know any of these fuckers. And so I sent him a message, and I was like, hey, told him my story. And I was like, my name's Shane. I'm from San Diego. Took 23andMe. Looks like you're my blood uncle. Like, you're my first uncle, which means one of your brothers are my dad. Like, what can you tell me? And so he messaged me back in 2 minutes and was like, holy shit. He was like, this is crazy, yada, yada, yada. We go into the story, and he tells me that he has 2 brothers that had lived in San Diego, moved to San Diego in the mid 80s. They had joined the military and had gotten stationed out here in San Diego. And that one of his brothers, both of his brothers had actually gotten into some trouble, and after the military, got into some gangs, got into drugs, and got into alcohol and all that shit, in and out of jail. And he had one brother that has been MIA since for like 20 years or like 10, 20 years. They don't know where he's at. He moved to a different country and fled and did some other shit. And that he had another brother that was living in the Bay Area as a foreman, electrician. And so he goes, the odds are is that my brother that fled the country is probably your dad, because he's the one that has been, on drugs his whole life. And my other brother, Ralph, has been clean and sober for 25 years. And so he goes, well, let me call Ralph and see what's going on. Let me talk to him. So he called him, and 30 minutes later, I get a message, and he's like, here's Ralph's number. Give him a call. He wants to talk to you. He said, regardless, he's like, he's your uncle. He's probably going to be your uncle. So, but he still wants to be a part of your life. Like, if you're part of the family, you're part of the family. So I called him, and picks up the phone. Guy's got a 619 area code. And I'm like, I'm 619. I'm like, okay, this is weird. Like and so I called him, and he's on a job, and he's like, hey, what's going on, Shane? And I started talking to him, and I started naming my dad and stuff. And he's like, he like gets silent, and he's like, who's your mom? And then I was like, told him my mom, and he's like, who's your aunt? And then I started telling him these names, and he just goes like, you could just feel it, dude. Like, you felt the energy. And he's like, fuck. And I was like, what? And he's like, what color hair do you have? And I was like, blonde. He's like, what color are your eyes? And I was like, blue. And he was like, you're my fucking kid. And I was like, why? And he goes, I'm the only one with blonde hair and blue eyes. And my brother Ralph said, who could be potentially your dad, he's 5'5" or 5'6", black hair and brown eyes. And he sent me a picture, dude, and it was like, I sent him a picture of me and you put them together, and it was like facial features, smile, nose, eyes, hair, like everything was there. And he was like, holy crap. And so we had like a 30-minute conversation. He's like, I got to get back to work, but I'd love to continue this conversation with you. And so he called me when he got off work that night, and he had told me some stories, and he's like, this is how I met your mom. And I, this portion of it can't really enter because there's some like heavy gang shit that is involved with it, like very bad, and like the reason why he had to leave San Diego and just the whole nine, and stuff that can't be repeated. But essentially what had happened is my mom got into some trouble with a particular gang. Another gang had kidnapped her, and we're holding her for ransom. And my aunt, who brought me to California from Texas, was tasked with doing the exchange for my mom. And so my aunt had to hire a few guys, a couple goons, to go rescue my mom and do the exchange. And my biological father happened to be one of those guys. So when they got my mom back, they threw a party. Shit got wild. My biological dad, my mom hooked up one time only. And the next morning, I guess my biological dad was like at my mom's place, and my mom wasn't there. And who my mom thought my dad was, he ended up coming home to my mom's place and seeing my biological dad in there, and they beat the shit out of him. And they said, if you don't leave San Diego, like, it's not going to be good for you. And that's when he left, moved to the Bay, and got his shit together. And he, did do some time, and I think like 90 to 95. And then after he got out in 95, he went to school, electrician, got a job, and now he's a foreman, has been clean and sober for 20 something years, and had been living in the Bay the whole time, and didn't even know he had kids. He didn't have any kids until he found out he had me, and moved. That was about a year and a half ago. So he quit his job up in San Francisco and moved to San Diego, and wants to be a part of my life. And now he's living down here in San Diego, shows up to all my son's baseball games, and comes to the shop, helps me out at my local card shows for my Pokemon, and comes over to the house all the time, hangs out with the grandkids. And it's like, man, it was like I was at lunch one day and getting ready to move to Peru with my wife and go back to where she's from and live in the jungle and go on a coffee farm. And all of a sudden I get this lunchtime call that I'm a dad and I have 2 grandkids. And so that's been a journey for sure.
Wow. I mean, that's awesome though, man.
Yeah.
You actually got to rekindle, and, the not so fairy tale story, actually has some kind of a happy ending and some kind of closure of like, wow, man, my dad is actually alive and here.
Yeah.
And you have a relationship with him. That's amazing, man.
Yeah.
That's good. It's good. And it's also awesome that your dad kind of was like, I want to be a part of your life. Not only that, but my grandkids as well.
Right.
That's awesome, dude. So how's business going, man? First of all, what business are you in?
I'm in, some super really hard labor shit. Every day I'm swinging a hammer. No, man, I am in the business of Pokemon cards. That who would have thought, right? And so, I buying and selling the Pokemon cards. I partnered up with a buddy of mine, a friend of mine that I've been friends with for a couple of years, was opening a shop, and I was kind of doing it as a hobby. I went to Comic-Con in LA in December of 2021, and that was like right after the COVID pandemic. And I went up there and I was like, holy moly, like I looked around, I'm like, Pokemon cards, like this is a thing again. And so as a child, I remember when I got taken away when I was in 8th grade, the one thing that I had on me in my possession was Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and that was like my prized possession. And so when I got taken away, I asked the sheriff on the way to Polinsky if we could stop by the house to go get my Pokemon cards in my binder. And Clean Sober Living had actually just cleaned out my mom's bedroom and threw everything in a dumpster and sent it on its way. So my binder went out the window. And so like my childhood, like the one thing that I had tied to was just thrown away. So when I got to Comic-Con in LA, I was like, Pokemon. And he had like 20, 30 people there selling Pokemon cards. I'm sitting here thinking like, what the hell, man? I'm like working for AT&T. I'm selling windows and doors for Pella. And I was like, Pokemon cards? And I was with my kid, and I'd bought in some packs, and I remember at the first pack I bought, me and my son pulled like a $200 card, and the guy was like, that's a $200 card, and I was like, what the fuck? And I immediately was like hooked again, and I had started conversating with him. I'm like, hey man, like, how'd you get into this? Like, tell me about it. Are you making money? Like, every vendor, I started going around and meeting all these vendors, and I was like, dude, I can do this, man. This is super easy to do. Salesman at heart and naturally good with people. And so I came home and I told my lady, and she was pregnant with our daughter. And I was like, babe, I was like, I'm about to start a Pokemon business. She's like, a what? And I was like, a Pokemon business. And she's like, no, you're not. And at this time, I'm like trying everything, right? Like I was doing Amway, and then I'm doing all these MLM shit. I'm trying to sell energy drinks and soap. And then, now I'm like going to thrift stores, like buying and reselling shoes on eBay. And I'm like, gonna make it on eBay, selling shoes. And this, I come home, I'm like, I'm about to sell Pokemon cards. And she's like, yeah, whatever, babe, And so I went in and I went ham, dude. I racked up, I fucking maxed out all my credit cards, started buying shit. And then, like, for the first couple months for me was nostalgic. So I was just buying and ripping, and like quickly realized that there's no money in buying and ripping Pokemon cards, especially when you're buying retail. And so I started like doing local shows. Did my first local show about 2 months after getting started in Pokemon, and had my table, like had a little 6-foot table, and just had all some like just shit, I had nothing. But I had immediately like quickly learned, I was like, this is something I could do, like being behind a table, buying and flipping cards and like taking stuff in, and like taking my casino industry experience that I had, like making like carnival games and like just making things fun. And it's been about 14 months, and I'm partnered up with a buddy of mine. We just opened up our first store location. We're on our 4th week of having the store, and now we're actually getting ready to open up a second location already. And man, I went and did my taxes in my first year in business. I went and talked to my tax guy, dude, and I did $150,000 in revenue in my first year in business in Pokemon, just starting. And so told my lady, and I got my ass kicked by California in taxes because I had no idea I did that much. They were like, look at my tax number. I'm like, oh, how much? And they were like 12,000. I was like, what the fuck? They're like, yeah, you made 150 grand, selling Pokemon cards. I was like, holy crap. And so looked into it. My buddy and I were talking for a while about, he was opening a shop, and I had kind of like planted seeds. I'm like, do I open a shop? Can I do it? I'm still working full time. And man, it's been the biggest blessing for sure. It's got the shop open. My lady lost her job, and she lost her job. I opened the shop, and it's like, usually people are panicking. And this time I'm like, yeah, I was like, dude, come home. It's fine. Like, I got it. Like, it's fine. This is taking off. And I mean, I've been on YouTube videos now. I've been on 4 YouTube videos with this local Pokemon out here in Del Mar, and his name's Deep Pocket Monster. And I've been in 4 videos, and 3 of them have cracked 1 million views. One's cracked 2 million views. He just put one out, 14 days ago, and it's already at 750,000 views. I'm hosting shows. I hosted San Diego's largest trade show for Pokemon cards in March for Pokemon. We had 80,000 square feet rented out at Del Mar Fairgrounds. Now I'm getting ready to help out one of the YouTubers in Anaheim. He's putting on a 50,000 square foot show. We're having all the Pokemon influencers come. Three different influencers with over 2 million subscribers on YouTube are going to be there. And I'm in charge of all the vendors. Like, it's literally been 16 months, and it's like I've morphed from like buying product from Target and reselling to like now I'm getting paid to go and do these events. And it's been awesome.
Dude, that is awesome, man.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So where do they find you at?
Find me I'm on Instagram. So Instagram, it's at Slims Rips. It's SLIMS_rips. I am also starting my own YouTube channel. It's a little bare right now. We haven't gotten that platform up and rolling. And then my shop location is 645 H Street, Suite G, Chula Vista, California, 91910. This is our first location, and then we're getting ready to launch our second location in Carlsbad. There's an old Sears that shut down in the mall, and my buddy wanted to do a weekly trade show there, and he pretty much rented out Sears, and he's going to have about 60 different vendors there selling kind of like a swap meet kind of thing. but a more permanent basis, and it's going to be there on the weekend. So that's coming soon as well.
Dude, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
So, you know what makes a badass? Somebody who's endured a lifelong full of trauma. And against all the odds of being sexually, mentally, physically abused by the system, not taken care of by anybody, had small glimpses of hope. And a couple of people came in your life and turned you around. And you let them do it.
Yeah.
And you didn't let the trauma dictate the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And you turned it around.
Yeah.
And you made something of yourself.
I did.
By all odds.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be. You should be dead or locked into prison. But you didn't.
Yeah. You,
my friend, are a badass.
Thank you. And as I walk through this journey, like, you know, it's that's what makes me believe that there is a God, if that makes sense, man. Like you said, I mean, statistically, as a foster kid, less than 1% of foster kids, the history of foster care since it's been tracked, less than 1% of foster kids ever graduate college. I should have had 17 years as a child. I mean, I've been stabbed, I've been beaten, I've been like, literally, my parents' boyfriends and girls have tried to murder me. And it's like, you look at these things and it's like, how can there not be? Like, how can there not be guardian angels? How can there not be another presence watching over it? Like, I have every room. And so every reason to have failed, and definitely, like, you know, I want to take accolades on there as it is, but like, I have to give glory to where, you know, our creator is at, and our Father for sure. And just like, you look at these miracles and you're like, how else can you define this besides like luck? Like, no way. Like,
God had his
way.
hand on your shoulder
For
and
sure,
was guiding you. You just didn't even know it yet. And now you do, my man.
Yeah.
And you know what? It's a pleasure not only for you to come on here, but it's a pleasure to call you a friend, man.
Thank you.
Thank you. You are a badass, Shane Pinson.
Thank you.
All right, man. Well, we're cutting off the show now. And dude, thank you again. And we'll be hanging out. We'll be doing poker night.
Thanks for having me, brother. Yeah. Hey, wait, how did we meet again? I remember we met. Your kids were selling lemonade.
Yeah, my kids were selling lemonade on the corner of my street. And you were, I think, living a couple of blocks away.
Yeah.
And you just rolled over, man. Me and you just started talking, and we're like, hey, dude, let's go have fun. Hey, let's start hanging out. And we hung out a few times, did poker night. Yeah. And did things, but, you know, we all kind of went our separate ways, kids. Yeah. You know, moving situations and stuff like that. Yeah. And
we always stayed connected, man.
We always stay connected, whether it's Facebook or texting me like, hey, dude, thinking of you, dude. What's up?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And then, you know, my son wanted, what was that bird called? Pterodon or something?
Yeah. It was a Godzilla bird, right?
Yeah, Godzilla bird. And then me and you started talking again. And, but again, man, we're going to stay really connected. And, dude, awesome, man.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, brother.
Hey, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
If you have a heroic story and you'd like to share it, get in contact with us. Our information's in the bio. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe, like, and share. And then I'll see you on the next episode, badasses.